The early 2000s changed the video game industry almost overnight. A fact you would definitely be familiar with if you had watched my videos on Jak and Daxter: The Precursor Legacy, Jak 2, and Jak 3. For a studio like Naughty Dog, whose approach had always been to perfect existing and popular gameplay models as a vehicle to push the boundaries of technology in games, this was a difficult time. I won't recap the previous videos too much, but I'm just saying that they massively overhauled Jak and Daxter for this very reason. Jak 3 launched in the fall of 2004, and that game was the last one Naughty Dog developed while the co-founders Andy Gavin and Jason Rubin worked at the studio. Jak 3's development cycle being their opportunity to smoothly transition between that old leadership and the one we know today. While developing Jak 3, the studio already knew that for PlayStation 3 they were going to fully embrace what the industry is most interested in, games starring real humans using real weapons. That ended up being Uncharted: Drake's Fortune, which was released in 2007, something I can go way more in depth on when I do an Uncharted retrospective in the near future. However, I bring it up now because as a buffer between games, Naughty Dog did one last game on PlayStation 2, an epilogue to the Jak series, Jak X Combat Racing. The first game the studio had released completely without its founders in 2005, but Jak X was going to be a smaller title, reusing assets from previous games and just building a racing title with those assets. And if there's one thing Jak had consistently had throughout the trilogy, it was vehicles.
If there's one thing I can do, it's race.
So it was a natural fit, and not something the studio was unfamiliar with, having capped off their Crash run on PS1 with Crash Team Racing in 1999. Despite all that, and my immense nostalgia for the Jak series, I never played this game as a kid. I played all the Sly, Ratchet, and every other Jak game when I was a kid, but this one consistently evaded me. I always thought of it as a I'll get it eventually kind of game, but never did. Always had my eyes caught on some other game. The one time I could have gotten it, actually, my uncle was like, "This is rated T. I'm not buying this." Good on him for that level of due diligence when buying a game for a 6-year-old or whatever the hell I was at the time. But hey, I did walk out of that store with Tie 3 on Game Boy Advance though. Maybe that series is worth a retrospective someday. It's been years since I played any of those. Anyway, I never got around to playing Jak X Combat Racing until 2012, which of course was a hot minute ago now compared to how old the game was in 2012, but I already talked about feeling old in the Jak 2 video, so I'll just get to the point. Do I like Jak X, even though I didn't play it back when it was hot off the presses? Well, the title of the video says all. I think this game is fantastic, and dare I say, is way better than Jak 3. That's in a genre I don't even play that much of. Games where the multiplayer component is the most important one are games I tend to lose interest in quickly. So fighting games and racing games, while being things I have experience with, it's not particularly vast because without a strong single player campaign, I just don't feel the incentive to keep coming back and playing more of the game. Just look at Crash Team Racing, which I mentioned a few moments ago. My review of that game a few years ago was the first time I played it, and it was also the last time. I don't think these games are bad, I just know they aren't for me. So if one of those games does manage to get its hooks in me, that's how I know I've got a real winner on my hands. One of the quickest ways you can get me into a game is if that game has a sick sense of style. Crash Team Racing took all the elements of and lessons learned from the Crash trilogy into a racing game that suited that brand that could stand toe-to-toe with Mario Kart or Diddy Kong Racing. Jak X did the same thing, looking at the best parts of the Jak series' personality and coming up with a racing game to suit that. This game isn't trying to be the PS2's Mario Kart Double Dash. It's full-on F-Zero meets Twisted Metal combined with the Jak world and iconography, creating this deadly racing game, where, as the title shows, you don't just race, it's full-on fight-to-the-death combat racing. So to go along with that hardcore racing identity, the game has this metal music to suit any track it plays as you blast your way through the opposition and just barely outrun their attacks yourself. I said I love the soundtracks in the Jak trilogy, but this music is easily the best one in the series, one I listen to frequently when doing projects on my computer and I'm in need of some background noise. Just a soundtrack that I think is a genuinely good listen if you're someone who's into that intense mid-2000s kind of stuff. So what's going on in this Jak X game? Well, in short, Jak and friends have been invited by Crew's daughter, Rain, to hear his last will, Crew being a crime lord that Jak and Daxter left for dead in Jak 2. A hologram of Crew boldly proclaims that the party gathered here today will race for him in the Crash City Grand Championship, and to make sure they do it, the drink they all toasted over was poison, and the only way to get the antidote is by racing. But of course, it's not that simple. The competition is run by the Mizo crime syndicate, so our heroes have to face their own inevitable doom while also competing against dangerous criminals who also want them dead for upsetting the order of the criminal underworld in Crash City. The story serves its purpose for getting the characters racing, and I do mean almost all of them. In the story mode, you only play as Jak, with Daxter flailing about on top of your vehicle, but in the multiplayer, you get to play as a whole host of characters from the Jak series, all given new attire fit for racing, such as Ashlyn, Torn, Sig, Kira, Cleaver, and new characters from Jak X like the sports commentator, GT Blitz, or Jak's new racing rivals like UR86 or Razor. By visiting the secrets menu, you can unlock other characters as well. If your memory card has a save file on it for Jak 1, 2, and 3, you get to play as Jak from those games, and if your card has a save file for Ratchet Deadlocked on it, then you get to play as Ratchet from that game with new audio recorded from his voice actor for this game. At the time of Jak X's development, there was also a Daxter spin-off game in the works for the PlayStation Portable, so Jak X built in a bunch of characters from that game to be playable in this game by connecting your PSP. With all these characters unlocked, I'd say this is a pretty stacked roster full of fan favorites, although it was a big missed opportunity to not have Samos as a playable character. I mean, he's the funniest character in the series, and it would have been a riot to unlock him and blow Jak and Torn to bits with rockets and all that. But that's just one glaring omission from Jak X's roster. Otherwise, I think it's great that we get to take all these characters we know out on the track in this one. It's a nice epilogue to Naughty Dog's time with the series. One of the biggest things the team wanted to achieve with Jak X was giving the player an assortment of ways to customize their vehicles. Throughout the story, you unlock more and more race cars to work with, and also new hoods, new side panels, front and rear fenders, wheels and trunks that you can mix and match however you see fit. These don't have any strategic advantage, it's just giving the cars different designs and styles that allows players to make vehicles to their preference. You could even ride with no plating whatsoever. What does impact the play experience is the game allowing you to spend your currency from completed missions on upgrading your car of choice's stats, such as its armor, its boost gauge, the acceleration, and the top speed, allowing the rides you like the best to reach their full potential. I'm a sucker for games that allow the players to customize cosmetics, and so I just get a lot of reward out of mixing and matching the different parts, but especially got reward out of the paint job feature. Each ride can be given a body color and a stripe color. I tried cladding my vehicle in Jay's Review's colors, but that looked completely hideous without the white and black to contrast with the blue and green, so instead I defaulted to my usual favorites, black and green, black and blue, black and red, but then mixed it up. Silver and orange, silver and red, using black as a stripe instead of a body color, and so on. I was genuinely swapping paint jobs with almost every race I did, and with a color wheel this extensive, can you blame me? It sparks my imagination. When actually pulling up to the track, it's immediately obvious just how much more fun the cars are to control in this game compared to Jak 3. In that game, the physics on each vehicle was definitely interesting to see as your car would interact with the bumpy terrain of the wasteland, but it's not handling that's particularly satisfying when trying to race. So Jak X improved that by making the turns feel smoother and the track straighter in design. And for ones that aren't, I thought the skid turns were really responsive, although I always seem to struggle with these tube tunnels in the sewers. This goes for each of your vehicles. The first 3 cups of the game all have their own vehicles, with each of them being a certain type. You have all-around vehicles that have a standard armor and speed, bulkier vehicles that are best used in the combat maps, smaller cars that are the fastest but the weakest in terms of health, and hybrid cars that aren't as efficient in either of the previous 2 advantages as the specialized vehicles, but is good with both. In regards to combat and other things worth noting about the mechanics, I love how they made sure to tie each weapon variety to a type of eco and how they were used in Jak 1. This is also something I liked about the morph gun in Jak 2 and 3. It just helps making the whole series feel like it's a part of the same world. Eco is still what everything is built from. Green eco is how you repair damage to your car on the track, your health bar being displayed in the bottom left. This is the most rare pickup of the bunch, and so when you see one you instantly want to grab it so you can tank more damage from incoming attacks. Blue eco is where your boost gauge comes from as you refill with pickups on the track. But the game also encourages you to jump off of ramps for maximum airtime and to perform tight skid turns because the longer you hold those, they'll refill your boost gauge, keeping you in the front of the pile. By defeating enemies, you collect Dark Eco, and when that gauge is filled, all your attacks will become stronger, your boost gauge will be filled up to the max, and so on. But on the note of the attacks, you use Yellow Eco weapons to attack your foes in front of you, whether that be bombs, missiles, bullets, or a Peacemaker shot, and Red Eco weapons being used for defense, like a mine that you leave behind or a shield that you raise around your vehicle. I think the weapons are all pretty cool in Jak X, I just don't think they're balanced the best, which is the only mechanical problem I can really bring up. The offensive weapons are super powerful, capable of blowing up a vehicle within a few shots. However, you don't get that many defensive weapons in response. For example, you'll get 2 missile shots, which fire 2 missiles each. When it locks onto you, you can deploy a defensive weapon like a mine to deflect the attack, but you only get 1 mine, so you'll have to just tank the damage on the second set of missiles that player has. If you have a full health bar, you won't die from this, but I do feel like it's cheap that there's nothing I can do to avoid damage in this instance. Maybe it would be unbalanced if you had 2 mines to block all the missiles, but maybe skilled players could just skid turn at the right angle to dodge missiles and then I'd be fine with it. But as it stands, I think the way the game is balanced makes red eco's use hard to determine. The characters encourage you to use eco the second you get it, which makes sense. For example, leaving behind a drone that blasts the drivers who pass by it will further damage the enemies behind you, making it harder for them to catch up and more difficult to use weapons on you. But since I could be attacked at any moment, I try to hoard my red eco weapons for as long as possible to make sure I can use it to deflect incoming attacks. But the issue only gets worse when the players in the back get access to the Peacemaker, which locks in on the player in first place and kills them instantly. Your only hope in avoiding this is having a shield raised. The Peacemaker will be deflected by the shield, which is from my experience the rarest defensive drop in the game. I just don't like mechanics like the Peacemaker, where I'll be leading the pack for most of the race, but at the end it can be stolen from me by a weapon I literally cannot dodge. I just don't think that's fair. Although I think this issue is pretty minor. It's just something that irks me every now and again while racing, as opposed to a serious problem. Lots of racing games have items that players in the back use to wreck players in the front, but I'm just saying that's my preference to not have it that way if I were designing the game. But then that just brings up the conversation about how accessible a game is if less skilled players will just get utterly wrecked by people who have played it for longer. It's a whole thing. So from a certain point of view, it makes sense to design it like that. Jak X is a title with a lot of variety. The standard racing is what you'll do most with a certain number of laps around the track. Shorter tracks will have up to 5 laps like the races in Jak 2, and longer tracks will have 2 laps, making it so that each track gets a roughly equal amount of playtime. But then there are a whole host of other modes that take place on these tracks, such as death races where the player has to blast a certain number of drone cars under a time limit in order to get the gold medal. Freeze rallies where you need to reach the goal under a strict time limit, and so you need to strategically hit these time-stopping items to stop the clock for however long that time lasts, ranging from 2 seconds to the rare 10-second time stop. There are power cell races where you grab a power cell and need to boost continuously until the power cell is charged to 100%, where it will then attack another racer. Once a power cell is fully charged up, you'll get a defensive item to block any power cell coming towards you. I actually think this is my favorite mode in the game, as it's really satisfying to see a power cell coming for you and just barely get to 100% in time and block that attack. And it feels equally crushing to almost get a power cell charged up but then get hit right before it happens. By the end, the racer with the highest amount of power cells charged up wins. The only standard race mode that I don't like would be Rush Hour. Players must face off against an onslaught of cars coming your way and you must slam into them for points. Green ones are worth 1 point, blue ones are worth 2, and red ones do damage to your vehicle. It's simple in concept, but whenever I play it, I can never get a flow going because I'm just bouncing all over the place trying to get my bearings. It's better done with the bigger rides, but that doesn't really fix the core issue here. To mix it up, every now and again you get a break from the core racing and go to these big combat maps. Here you do standard death matches where you try to get the most kills in the time limit, but then they also give variety to these maps too. Some missions testing which racer can hunt the most raptors in the time limit, who can get the most artifacts, and my favorite, capture the power cell. Racers are divided into 2 teams and a power cell will spawn in the area, and your goal is to grab that power cell and bring it back to your base before getting blown up by the other team, giving them the chance to nab the power cell and bring it back to their base, as you then need to destroy them before they can make it. It's a really fun mode and feels pretty competitive, even when playing against CPUs. So this game has all these different tracks and modes and all that, so I think it's worth mentioning that because the game is centered around segmented racing levels, this game features loading screens. They're over fairly quickly and were pretty much inevitable, unless Naughty Dog wanted to make an open-world racing game. But since the series had prided itself on not putting the words loading on the screen, I figured I'd mention that, since it's something that took me by surprise when starting up Jak X for this video. Another thing Jak X does differently from previous games on a technical level will be how they handled the cutscenes. Jaks 1 through 3 all had the cutscenes play out in-engine, but Jak X's cutscenes were pre-rendered. When playing the game at the native resolution, it's harder to spot, but if you try cleaning them up, the artifacts are pretty easy to see. I never knew why they did this prior to making the video, but luckily, the game itself informs us as to why. Like Jak 3, you can unlock animators' commentary on each of the cutscenes, and in the scene where Jak and company toast to Crew's will, it is explained.
Now, this scene is also interesting because this is really the first scene where we took advantage of the fact that we were essentially screenshot capturing all of the scenes instead of playing them back in real time. And this enabled us to do a hologram effect that pretty much would have been impossible to do, or at least not look nearly as cool in real time on the PlayStation 2. So essentially, this is a scene is composited much like a film special effect would be composited. What we had to do was create 2 separate scenes. One scene that had all of the characters except Crew in it, and then another scene that had just Crew in it against a purple-black background. And what we were able to do is extract Crew from the purple background and then superimpose him over the scene that you see here.
So yeah, in order to pull off the effects they did, like Cruise Hologram, or I'm imagining the GT Show overlay, it was necessary to pre-render the scenes and superimpose elements like that. Little tidbits like that are why I wish every game had behind-the-scenes material. I also appreciate them including a video of the actors reading the lines for the first scene. It really allows you to appreciate how into it voice actors get as they move their arms and make facial expressions while reading the lines that you never see because you only hear their voices. It just reminds me of how I'm doing the same thing right now and you just can't see it. But anyway, in gameplay, Jak X still maintains a high bar of presentation. I mean, look at these environments. For racing game standards, vistas, lighting effects, and backdrops like this were a rarity on PlayStation 2. But this game pulled it off at these high speeds. I love going in the first person mode with the select button, as you can then see how wide the tracks are as you blaze by with the ground view. I dare not imagine what it would be like playing this in VR. Even this late in the generation, Jak X does have a technical improvement from the previous games. All the PS2 Jak games allow you to display them in 16:9, but Jak X was the first one to have a true, authentic widescreen display. I mean that if you pick 4:3 in the previous games, you'll see the image how it would appear on a CRT, but if you pick 16:9 in the event your display in the early 2000s supported that, the first 3 Jak games, as well as many other games with a 16:9 display mode at the time, would simply crop the image in the top and bottom to fill the screen horizontally. Personally, I don't mind. I can't think of a game where this ever damaged my playing experience, but it's worth noting as some don't prefer to lose out on total visibility just to fill the screen. I'm just used to seeing the Jak trilogy like this, so it's weird to play in 4:3. But Jak X does what you'd hope to see in a widescreen setting, and actually shows more of the image on the left and right of the screen than it would have in 4:3. This is what remasters like the Ratchet & Clank HD Collection or the Sly HD Collection had done with those games. The Jak HD Collection just stuck with the cropped mode as the default, if you were curious. One of the best things about the newly released fan-made Jak 1 PC port is that it has true widescreen, another reason why it's the best version to exist. Looking forward to seeing how Jak 2 and 3 come together in the end. I say that because the team behind it have confirmed they're doing the full trilogy, but Jak X is still up in the air. I hope it does happen because Jak X never got remastered like the trilogy did in 2012. Maybe the time and budget wasn't there to have a 4th game attached, but seeing as Ratchet Deadlocked got a PS3 port separately from the Ratchet trilogy, it was just a bummer back in the PS3 days to see Jak X get left in the dust. However, the Jak series' history with ports and re-releases is quite messy as is. These segments in my videos about ports tend to go on pretty long, so I'll try to keep this discussion pretty brief, as I do think it's warranted to give my thoughts on the various versions of the Jak games now that we're at the last Naughty Dog game. But I don't want to be here all day, so here we go. The most complete way to experience these games today is on PS2, warts and all. These versions showcase the games as they were originally made and intended to be seen, however, some notes I should bring up. Jak X's original Black Label release had a memory card glitch that could wipe your whole save file or worse, corrupt your memory card entirely. This was fixed for the Greatest Hits release on PS2. If you play Jak X on a backwards compatible PS3, for some reason the game will just not load past the tutorial, but if you skip the tutorial, you can continue the game if I remember correctly. The PS3 Jak collection is largely fine. In fact, before the PC version, I'd say this was the best way to play the Precursor Legacy, running at 720p and having no issues I could speak on. Jak 2 is largely the same, removing the issues with performance drops and screen tearing, but the elephant in the room is this cutscene that reveals Core as the villain was completely ruined since his face looks like it was covered in ink. Jak 3 also has the same pros as Jak 2 HD, however the vehicles are much more annoying to deal with than they were on PS2 since they skid turn with very little input from the controller. So yeah, Jak 3 is way better on PS2. The Jak trilogy was then released on Vita a year later, and this has got to be one of the worst port jobs I've ever seen. Broken music, slippery controls on vehicles, a frame rate locked at 20 FPS that frequently drops below that in Jak 2 and 3, textures and effects don't look anything like they're supposed to, and you have an abysmal handheld port of great games. If you're one of the few who have fully completed the trilogy on Vita, you have my props. I think it's barely playable. Sonic Genesis tier bad. You have to imagine that this is the byproduct of extremely rushed development on the publisher's end and very difficult code to work with on the developer end. You gotta feel bad for the people who have to port these Jak games, as the PS2 games are all made with a custom coding language that the people behind the ports have had to detangle. So the HD collection being as good as it is a feat. Just look at what the people who worked on the games had to say in this behind the scenes on the HD collection.
Naughty Dog will probably tell you they told us at the beginning that this is an impossible project. And it wasn't long before we agreed with them.
We had like completely custom tools and completely custom way of using all the hardware. Made stuff back and forth between all the different processors and like did weird stuff on the old PlayStation 1 processor you weren't supposed to, and it was just a very complicated design.
Yeah, we didn't think when we were making the game of the people that would come through and improve the game.
So one would assume that it being announced that all 4 Jak games were coming to PS4 via their PS2 emulation service would mean that we were getting the original Jak games without all the BS. And you'd be very wrong. Of the console versions, the Jak games on PS4 and PS5 are the games at their absolute worst. These games have always been notoriously difficult to emulate as well, as these PS4 ports show that off best with broken effects, frequent frame drops, and graphical glitches. Thankfully, this version did see numerous patches post-launch. I mean, when it came out on PS4, the boost trails in the cars in Jak X barely touched the vehicles, stuff like that. Jak X has been patched to the point where it's largely playable, especially compared to the trilogy, but overall I think the PS4 versions are a dumpster fire, as several videos on YouTube have gone into. I mean, this version screws up the controls to the point where moving the analog stick in a circle feels awkward and stiff, unlike the other versions, because at launch, Jak could only move in 8 directions on PS4, and I believe that's now been updated to 16, so great. And that's that. Like I said, I tried to keep that little bit brief. Now let us resume discussing Jak X as originally released. So you have all these modes and missions at your fingertips. How does it work in the campaign? Well, in the story mode, you have 4 cups. By beating each mission, you get a maximum of 3 points depending on your performance. You need 50 points to unlock the Grand Prix of each cup, and by beating one, you move on to the next, repeat the process a few more times and you've beaten the game. And this is why it's good that the game has a variety of race modes and combat maps, since the game is pretty long. Maybe too long. There are 4 cups, and the one that I beat the easiest was the 3rd one in 90 minutes. The other 3 all took me over 2 hours. Jak X is a full-length Jak and Daxter game. I enjoy playing the game for most of its runtime, however I'd be lying if I didn't say that by the 3rd and 4th cups I was thinking, okay, how many more races does it take to get to 50 medals? Because after a certain point, you've seen pretty much everything the game has to offer, and it's just a matter of playing more of it until it's over. The game took me forever to beat the first time. I mentioned at the top of the video that I first got my hands on this game in 2012, the fall to be specific, and then I didn't actually beat it until the summer of 2015. That's my entire middle school career of on and off trying to beat Jak X Combat Racing, because the game is lengthy, but it's also pretty difficult. If you don't have a grasp on how to use defensive items, you'll get wrecked and get bronze medals, further lengthening the playtime. And then the 4 Grand Prix each have high stakes. To win these, you need to play 3 races back to back. If you restart, you go back to the first one. You get points for each one you win, 10 if you get in first place, 8 in second, and so on. If you have the highest amount of points by the end of race 3, then you win. On my first time doing the final Grand Prix in 2015, I was getting so mad, because I would just barely lose out in these long tour tracks. But I'm not criticizing the game here, I'm just noting that it took me an eon to beat this game back in the day. To the point where, when I reviewed Jak X for the first time back in 2016, I actually didn't play the whole game. I watched all the cutscenes and played like 1 cup, or like a half a cup, and just decided to review that, thinking it would take me weeks to beat the game. Yeah, if you ever wondered why I try to re-review games that I did in 9th grade, Exhibit A. But it's just funny because I replayed the first 4 Jak games back in 2019 and it took me a weekend to beat Jak X, and I was like, damn, who knew? And then for this video, I once again beat the game in a 48-hour period. Who knew it could be so simple? Even though racing can start to wear on you by the 6th or 7th hour of playtime, you still have plenty of motivation to see the game through to the finish line, and that's because of the game's story. I didn't hide the fact that I thought Jak 3's plot was a mess last week, and I think Jak X is a wholesale improvement. This is especially worthy of praise since this is a racing game. The team mentioned in the commentary track that they needed to come up with story beats that would be resolved in the racetrack, and beats that the audience actually cares about, you know? CTR had a reason why you were racing, but not one that the audience would be invested in. It's just a cartoon setup, nothing more, nothing less. But Jak X took the biggest thing from Jak 2, using story as a reward for gameplay, and then they pulled that off in a racing game, which is a job well done. Where Jak 3 went wrong was its unfocused main plot, its overly large cast of characters, and its villains. Jak X is much simpler. The plot is just Jak and friends need to race to get that antidote, so that's the most important thing. Everyone's on board with that basic goal. But this leaves room for more complexity between characters, such as it being the elephant in the room that Jak is the one who left crew for dead and Rain doesn't know this, which comes to light at the end of the game from GT Blitz, causing her to trust Jak less. Or how Kira, who's been a support character from day one, wants to finally get in the mix herself, but Samos is against it, which gets resolved by her finally joining the races in the last cup. The game still has a pretty large amount of characters in the plot, like how Sig shows up to support the team, Cleaver joins to muck in your mud, and you face other rival characters like Razor and UR86, but centering the plot around the Grand Championship makes the plot easier to follow than Jak 3. Sig is here to race, and he's going to offer his underworld knowledge as best he can. The whole plot sees you gradually unravel the conspiracy of Mizo, the crime boss rigging the tournament in his favor, as you upset the balance of power by winning more races. The mystery of the story also concerns the event's commentator, GT Blitz, whose father was killed by the Mizo Syndicate back when he was a racer, but Blitz doesn't seem to care, he just wants ratings. Although on the subject of Blitz, he's where the story's humor comes from. While you could say his bit of being the flashy showman gets old by the end of the first cup, it gets really funny when Pecker gets added as his co-commentator and the two just trade insults in highly comedic fashion. Once you win the Grand Prix, you get the antidote as Rain explains that Crew was trying to defeat Mizo for years, but can never ID the guy, and that's because Mizo doesn't exist. GT was Mizo all along, having set up his own father's death as revenge for the man caring so much about racing, and then running this crime syndicate ever since, maintaining cover by being the lead commentator. But the winner of this race determined who would run organized crime in Crash City. In a desperate move to stay on top, Mizo steals the antidote as Jak chases after him. It's a pretty simple final boss where you have to shoot Mizo's car until he has no health left, although I have to mention something really funny that I've never seen before. The mission ends as soon as Mizo runs out of health, but his AI forgot to jump off this ramp, so Mizo just fell into the abyss, not even 25% of the way through the battle, and just won automatically. That was funny. But of course, Jak gets the antidote and gets the last word in on Mizo in a really satisfying way.
You have a habit of leaving people to die, don't you? You get used to it.
Bringing us to the ending where everyone is cured and the day is saved. But in one final twist, it turns out that Rain was never poisoned and was never innocent either. She's now in control of organized crime in the city and couldn't have done it without the help of Jak and friends. Although she did actually grow to like them, even though she knows they're definitely not friends now. But the heroes just say, hey, well, at least we're good.
The important thing is we won. And we're alive.
And we brought down that scumbag Mizo.
And we rocked the racing circuit, right, Jak?
Finally allowing Jak and Kira the moment they've been denied game after game.
Will you kiss her already? Sheesh. Oh yeah, that's what I call a photo finish.
And that's Jak X. Honestly, I don't have too much to say about this one in conclusion. I mean, I've said it all already. The game is a satisfying combat racer with a slick aesthetic and vibe and a cool story. What more could you want? As an epilogue to Naughty Dog's time with the Jak and Daxter series, I think you can't go wrong with Jak X, although I'm probably not going to play this game again anytime soon. It's a bit wearying by the very end, but it's a great game overall. Similar to Crash before it, I think Naughty Dog was wise to close the series and move on to something new. The Jak series was always experimental, trying new things every time to see what worked. It was good of them to stick with it for a generation and give it a proper conclusion, but I think moving on to more stable, evergreen franchises was a wise move. Now that, through Jak and Daxter, they learned what they wanted to make. That doesn't take away from my love of Jak, I'm just saying that creatively I see why they went the direction they did, and I'll just enjoy the ride of Jak and Daxter for what it was. Although the Jak series didn't end here. I mentioned earlier that while Jak X was in development, a Daxter solo game was in the works for Sony's PlayStation Portable, so we'll give that a look next week. I don't tend to revisit this one, so we'll see how I feel about it. Until then, I'll say what I always do. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.